Okay.
Right. G'day everyone, and welcome to Malts, Mates. We have a live interview with SMWS Australia. Today we've got Matt Bailey of the SMWS Society Australia. Matt, how you doing?
Good to see you, mate. How are you?
You just froze for a second.
Whoa. Okay. I'm good. How are you going?
I'm very good. I am just starting my day. So what are you drinking today?
You know what? I said to you just before we went live that I've just finished a live stream, a tasting that both our cellar master and myself were hosting, and it's a Scotch Malt Whisky Society virtual tasting, and we had all these lovely little miniatures kicking around, and we sent them all to the members, and they're all Society single casks. So I've got a little bit left in some of them from tonight. So I've poured out the rest of my Dreamer's Dram 134.7, but I've also got a 107.10. If anyone wants to talk about codes, we can talk about codes. But look, that's 107.10 and that's 134.7. You used to be at the SMWS, and you might not have seen 134 in your time. That's sort of maybe a little bit.
That was just after I left. I think it's Indian.
It is Indian whiskey. That's correct. That's correct. Yes. Is
it Ramper?
No, it's the other one that doesn't start with A.
Omar.
Paul John.
Oh, I did see plenty of Paul Johns.
Yeah. Bits and bobs. It's good to see you again, by the way. Thanks so much for having me on tonight. This is great. Or tonight, my time. It's 9 p.m. in Australia for everyone watching at home, so it's definitely dram o'clock here.
It is 1 p.m. in Belgium.
And where are you at the moment? Where are you based?
I am in Antwerp.
You're in Antwerp. Wow. Very cool.
Yeah. I'm just going to try something. Sorry.
You do you. Well, I think I've lost him. Your audio bumped out.
How's that?
That's fine. I can hear you now.
Well, I still have some echo, and soon to mention I've got some echo.
Oh, you're getting comments about it as well, are you?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try something else as well. Hold on.
We are professionals.
We know what we're doing.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
let's try it now.
Can you hear me?
I can. I've got a tiny bit of an echo.
Because I've turned off my Roadcaster so I can get you direct instead. But I can turn that back on if it's easier.
How about the echo?
I can't hear you.
The echo is worse.
It's worse? Oh man. Okay. I'm going to try back with the Roadcaster. Okay, how does that?
I can hear you. Oh, and there's no echo.
Look at that.
Excellent. Okay. We just had to turn it off and on again.
Yeah. It's like a computer. Actually, it is actually computers.
Oh no, I was going to say I'm in Antwerp at the moment, and in honor of being in Belgium, I tried to get some Society bottlings over, but I took the Eurostar, and I didn't know if they would take the bottles away from me. So I picked up some Belgian whiskey while I'm here.
All right.
Yeah, really great stuff. I would be happy to see the Society bring it. I'll see if I can send you some. It's pretty good shit. I gotta say.
I'll gladly buy it. Don't worry.
Hey, it's only about €50, so I don't know how much that translates to in Australia, but it's pretty cheap.
A few dollars.
Anyway, so tell us about yourself. Tell us about who Matt Bailey is and what you do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I work in whiskey. That much is pretty obvious because I'm on Malts with Mates. I work as the national ambassador / development director for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Australia. So it's sort of a two-pronged role. one half of the role is being ambassador. And that means that I host a lot of our tastings, a lot of our activations, our special experiences for members. Now, members of the club, members of the SMWS, who get access to our exclusive whiskies, our events, our experiences, our partner bars, our venues, all that kind of stuff, and our education, of course, our unfiltered and outturn. That's what I do. That's sort of half, if you like. The other half is, as development director, is to grow the membership in Australia. And so that's sort of what my current role is at the moment, especially with, post-COVID, I'll call it, where there's not so many events happening around the country. So it means that I'm able to focus on the other side of the business a bit stronger, which is always exciting. But there's swings and roundabouts a bit. I mean, but that's kind of the basics of what it is. But on a broader level, it's kind of like my career in whiskey is about, I'm going to go about 8 to 9-ish years old now. I've been involved in whiskey, and it's which is not a long time by, I guess, some standards of those who I know in the industry, but also a long time by others. And it's I'm seeing people come into the industry now who are just seeing, who are seeing what whiskey looks like in the last 6 months and sort of taking that as their snapshot, whereas my snapshot's about a decade. And it's I guess a matter of perspective. But my background's been in music, and in marketing and in whiskey and that's, I think my main focus in my role is about flavor, is about discovering flavor, about sharing those experiences with members.
No, fantastic. I guess it's funny as well, because you've been in whiskey for 8-9 years. We've been in whiskey for about the same amount of time.
Right.
And it is always interesting meeting the people who, because we're in the middle ground. There's a lot of people who've come in within the last 3 years, or as you say, the last 6 months. A lot of people have been within for 40 years. And we're on the verge of both of them. And people say, oh, have you seen this new whiskey release that came out the other day? And you have to say, no, I didn't, because there's a million whiskey reviews. There's a million whiskeys that have, and a million new bottlings every single week. And then the older guys who say, did you ever get a chance to try this one? And you say, that was before my time. So it's interesting how we kind of sit between the two, but still makes for a good laugh, makes for good fun.
I don't mind that, though. I mean, it kind of lends a unique perspective in a way, because then being that middle ground, you can forge your own sort of middle ground. You can forge your own path in what this is all about. And rather than being like, well, I've been in it for 50 years and you can sort of be like, well, therefore I was drinking Black Bumor when it was $6 a bottle, or, and then there's the other end of the spectrum when people are saying they've been in it for 6 months or less. And it's funny you say that comment there about there's a million new bottlings and releases every week, every month, of course. And that's the growth of what we've seen in whiskey, and it's still not keeping up with demand. But at the same time, it's I'd say it's the other side of the coin is just as relevant, because we're seeing so many new bloggers and writers and category people in the sphere. And I have a bit of a giggle at that, because some of them are doing a very good job. And I think a lot of people in COVID have taken up a new profession of reviewing whiskey from their living rooms. And that's fine. I think it's really exciting. But at the same time, some of it's not very good, I'll be honest.
As someone who reviews whiskey from his living room every single Wednesday, I hope I'm not included with them. It is great.
That wasn't a bait. I was literally saying it's sort of like it has exploded, though, the amount of people who are doing, I do a day. Okay, well, I'll give you an example. I do a daily live. We go live every single night at SMWS, and I do it from this office here with this backdrop of all the whiskey behind me. And it's every night, and I've been doing it every night for about 15 months. So that's kind of like, that's grown over time as a subscriber base. The members love it. Everyone enjoys it. And I'm not saying that if you get into the last 2 months, you shouldn't be doing it. I'm saying that it's like, I think you need to have at least a level of whiskey education to really talk about it authoritatively. And you certainly do. And I know your background enough to go, even from your background at SMWS, you have a whiskey knowledge background that is, but I'm talking about, there's a lot of people who have, and you're an Aussie, so you'll know this, but who'll jump over to Dan Murphy's and buy Glen Spirit 12, and then, and they'll call themselves a whiskey reviewer and blogger. It's like, I'm not going to name names, but I heard one recently. I love this. They were reviewing an Aaron that was extra matured in ex Sauternes cask. And it's
Okay.
like an extra terms finished, Aaron. And they called it the Aran Distillery. And they said it was extra matured in an ex-Saturinus cask was the wording they used. And I clicked out of the video and went, nope, I'm done here. This. You need to be. What I'm saying is, whiskey drinkers engaging with this level of education at this point in time deserve better.
Yeah.
They deserve better. And the level of knowledge and education in whiskey is constantly growing, which is exciting to see. I mean, look at even just 10 years ago when you started 10 years ago, people even then talking about whiskey as something that, oh, I like whiskey because it's smooth. And we've come such a long way from saying, oh, this is just smooth. Like, you know what? If I want smooth, I'll eat white bread. I want interesting. I want enigmatic. I want fascinating. I want exciting.
No, I think that's a great point. Firstly, I'm with you on, and I've made some enemies on this when I've said, when you're doing whiskey reviews, if you do want to call yourself a whiskey expert, I think that's kind of an arrogant title to give yourself a whiskey expert, but you need to have a certain level of education. And when I talk to guys and going to tastings, and I've been to tastings where, they'll say all Irish whiskey is triple distilled and every Scotch whiskey is double distilled. And I have to stand up and I have to say, well, aside from these dozen exceptions, and they say, well, I've never heard of them. I'm like, well, you've never heard of Rosebank or Springbank? These are two triple distilled Scottish whiskies. Well, the Hazelburn from Springbank. Yeah, Auchentoshan. You've never heard of these. They're some of the most famous whiskies in the world, and you've never heard of them. And they say, oh, no, we have heard of them. But it's about doing your research, and when you dive into a whiskey review like that, you want to have all the information available to you. Something as simple from the pronunciation of the name, and then going on to explaining terms. If someone says this is a single malt, I want you to be able to tell me, what does a single malt mean? I realize that the definition changes from country and country in a lot of cases, but the generally accepted definition we have, single distillery, 100% malted barley, that it's important for you to have that and be able to give it. I did have, you'll love this. This is a great story. I went to a tasting, would have been about 2 years ago, and it was just a plain Diageo tasting. It wasn't anything fancy. One of the guys there, we were chatting with, and me and my mate who went to Heriot Watt. He's a certified distiller.
Good stuff.
And the guy was saying he really loves whiskey. And he spoke about how he loves Johnny Walker. And we were both like, you know what? Everyone loves different whiskey. There's always going to be whiskey for someone else. And we were fine with that. And then he said he loved the way they do the red, the gold, the green, blue, black. And he said the way they do it, the way it was explained to him was that the red is when they get a cask of Johnny Walker, they mature a cask of Johnny Walker, and the red is the whiskey in the very center of the cask. And then the green is the whiskey just outside, and then the gold, and then it's blue when it's the whiskey that's next to the wood. And that was
really?
We have to, so we had a great laugh, and we explained to him that's not what it is. But then our thought was, the person who's told that to you, someone needs to be explained to that person. That is not how any of that works. That is not how whiskey maturation works. That's not how Johnny Walker works. That's not correct. So you need to stop saying that.
It's funny you even reference that. It's you remind me of our cellar master, Andrew Durbidge. I should mention to everyone watching, by the way, I don't even know if I said this at the beginning. I'm in Australia. I'm in Sydney, Australia. And our cellar master, Andrew, who I was just on live with tonight, he once said to me, like 2 or 3 years ago, actually, maybe even more, maybe 4 years ago, he said he's always really wary about people using the word masterclass to describe their tastings. And he says, like he said, anyone can host a whiskey tasting, but he believes that you have to be of a certain level to call yourself to be able to actually host a masterclass. It's a bit like your comment about someone who self-describes them as a whiskey expert. I'm a whiskey geek of the highest level. I'll admit that. I geek out about stuff with whiskey day in, day out. It's my hobby. It's my profession. It's everything I love. However, I would never call myself a whiskey expert. I find that to be I would have to have like a master's from Harriet Watt, and you know, on my resume it says studied with Dr. Jim Swan, and you know, kind of like that. I think you know you get to that level of where that person is actually a whiskey expert. And there's a number of people in the industry, both in Australia and in Scotland and elsewhere, that I would call whiskey experts. But I think it's a bit like like I said, it's using the word masterclass, using the word expert, and I'm seeing a little bit of I was saying last few months a bit of bastardization of that. But that Johnny Walker comment of is very it's quite funny. The middle and inner and outer of the cask. I've never heard that one, but that is true rot. Well done.
It's something else, but I think you're right, and I'll agree with you there. I think the whiskey experts, there are exceptions. There's people like Dave Broom, Charles McLean. These guys are whiskey experts. Susan Green, she is a whiskey expert. They are whiskey experts. They have studied it for a very long time.
Throwing names, I'll say Martin Nuet, I'll say Franz Schurer. Yep. I'll say names like that who are actual whiskey experts. But yeah, it's far and few between. It's probably a dozen people I could name in the world who I'd put into that category. Actually more than a dozen. But you know what I mean? There's a lot of, and even some distillers I've met wouldn't even fall into that category. They're very much chemists. They're sort of whiskey chemists. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a different categorization.
Yeah. No, it's definitely different. And as well, I think the term about masterclass, I've loved doing masterclasses. I think they're fun. But I think the problem that you run into, what you need to watch out for, is when you have the romanticized notion of whiskey starts to take over the class. And that's very dangerous because you start talking about things that are not true, things that we know now to not be true. Yeah. But it's better that we say this. And that's when you start to deviate and you start to give the company script. And a company script can be good, but at the same time, the company wants to present themselves in the most romanticized notion possible. And that is unfortunate when that happens, because then
I've got nothing wrong.
Masterclass turns into a brand exercise.
Yeah, I've got nothing wrong with storytelling, and storytelling can be fun. But when whiskey tastings, and whether they be online or in person, deviate into factual falsehoods, that's where it gets problematic. Like that line you're saying about double, triple distilled. I mean, let's be honest. And you know what? I had a great discussion with Dr. Sam Simmons actually about this just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Let's be honest. Most people at a whiskey tasting, there we go. There, yeah, Dr. Sam's product. Most people don't care. Most people don't like. If you start talking about double distillation and 2.81 malt like distillation and stuff like that, like they're going to zone out. It's not interesting, and it doesn't actually, and for good reason, because it doesn't tell you anything about the actual spirit. Like if I nose this whiskey in this glass and go, that's definitely 2.81111 distilled. That doesn't tell me anything about the whiskey. It doesn't actually talk about flavor. It doesn't talk about the history of the distillery. It doesn't tell me about the farmers that work there. And I call them farmers for good reason, but it doesn't tell me about the farmers and the people that work at these distilleries and create this spirit. It tells me nothing about it by saying, well, the wash is heated to a temperature of 92.1 degrees. It's nerdy stats that anyone can find online that is not interesting. The interesting stuff is lived experience and talking to these people and discovering what is about, what's that is about.
No, that's true. I think the best tastings you go to are when you get the story of the distillery, a couple of great anecdotes always help liven things up.
Yeah.
When someone is open as well, when they want to hear your experiences within whiskey, because you want to, it's a whiskey tasting. It shouldn't be like a branded tasting. It should be whiskey tasting. And I've always, most of my masterclasses, most of my tastings I always try to do, I want people to taste it, taste it first, and tell me what you think before I give you any type of script to taste it.
Yeah.
Because I think that as the tasting nights I give, there is going to be a bias where if I say you're going to get pineapple and vanilla and raspberry in this, when people knows, they go, I do get that. And it takes away, I feel it takes away from them and from their palate where they don't get to express their own opinion. I think the best tasting note I ever got was one of my first tastings at the Society, where we had a nice dirty Bowmore at the end.
Lovely.
And one of the women who was there, she smelt it and she went, oh, it smells like the bed sheets of a busy Newcastle girl.
Oh, I love tasting notes like that. I love those imaginative tasting notes. Yeah.
I think it's great. I said to her, "How do you know what that smells like?" And she said, "Well, I used to be a busy Newcastle girl." And I was like, "All right, this is a conversation. I'm going to steer away from this because your husband is having a laugh. I think he might." But that was great. I love those little bits and pieces. But if you dive in and if you say you'll get this, 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 you might lose those organic pieces. And you can go ultra nerdy, but you need the ultra nerdy crap for that. And as you
Well,
said,
well, that's
we're
it.
kind of the one where we're a very small percentile of whiskey lovers where you want to know every nerdy thing about it. And that's just
And
that's just
that's
life.
absolutely fine. It's the two things I would say to that is that part of that is of course what I call reading the room at any event. You'll get a after the first whiskey, not even after the first, during the first, you'll get a pretty good read of the knowledge level and participation level of an audience at a tasting, whether it be online or in person. And the second thing I'll say to that as well is that often at my tastings or anyone's tastings, one of my favorite things you notice is that when you're talking a good story, you'll often have sometimes someone in the room who wants to catch you out with a nerdy stat. And they want to ask you a question in the hopes that it'll sort of trip you up. Because it's like, well, I might know more than the presenter. And you know what? I've got no problem with someone in the audience knowing more than me on something. That's actually, I might learn something from them actually. But I always love they'll try and trip me up kind of thing. And the response is always, you know what? Why don't we have a chat after the tasting? Come up and have a chat afterwards. And that normally sort of quells those kind of sort of the the rowdy know-it-alls.
It's not a great feeling in some of those. It's because I used to get that when I worked in the bars, and it was stump the bartender. Someone comes up and they ask for the most obscure drink. Can you make me a Chevron's Landing? Sorry, I don't have a pineapple because we're not that type of bar.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is interesting. And talking about tastings as well, this is something I want to ask you. You did the tasting just before, which congratulations on doing the tasting. How have your tastings changed pre-COVID and currently?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, pre-COVID, of course, we were in full swing. I mean, it was small and large format gatherings at a multitude of venues across Australia. And that's what we've been doing for 17, 18 years now in Australia. However, during COVID, we very quickly adapted to meeting the needs of our members across the country in terms of virtual events. And that I think a lot of people, other whiskey businesses and whatnot, pardon me, didn't quite get to the party in time. And that's okay. They've all got different priorities. As I showed you right when we started, I think when we're having a bit of audio issues there, one of the drams I started with tonight came from a little bottle. These are what we're tasting tonight. These little sort of samples. They've got the full tasting note and the color and the flavor profile on them. The UK approved them. They like them. We like them. They're nice little glass bottles. We sent out packs of these to members so they can join in on a virtual tasting on StreamYard, having a chat with people about whiskey and discovering them with Andrew and myself. And that was kind of that was really important for us because, it's twofold important. A, not being able to do in-person events, that means these virtual ones are hugely popular across the country, of course. And the second, and when we sold hundreds and hundreds of these packs, they're great. But the second thing is you know very well, the geographical size of Australia, in that not everyone lives in the cities. So we host a lot of events in Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, Adelaide, Perth, and Canberra. Sorry, Canberra. Love you guys in Canberra. But we don't host tastings very often in Geelong, Ballarat, Newcastle, because they're regional towns. For those watching who don't know what these places are, they're regional towns in these areas, and they don't see whiskey tastings very often. And there's only one ambassador, and I can't get to every single regional town and just do tastings all the time, because that would be my entire role then, rather than the development side of it. So it works twofold, but they're really important. I mean, tastings for us, experiences moved online. But the funny part about your question is that I don't see that as something that's going to actually end post-COVID necessarily. We're sort of already investigating that at the moment. why can't this shift towards doing online tastings also work in the de-restricted new world? That why can't they both coexist, online and in-person tastings? There's no reason why we couldn't do a monthly like this. There's no reason why we couldn't do a monthly tasting online.
No, I mean that's perfect. That's a great answer, and I was expecting something like that because I think seeing the feedback and seeing how many people have participated with these tastings, these online ones, I think a lot of companies have seen that, and I think the companies view from two perspectives. The cynical one, where of course monetary, they don't have to pay for an ambassador to go to regional areas, different cities, but
Yeah.
also because I imagine within this, you've likely encountered some people who you may have never met before, who are SMWS members, maybe you've never been able to make it to a tasting because maybe they live, in like a Wagga or something. They live somewhere out in the sticks. I love Wagga Wagga, by the way. But they live out somewhere where they can't make it to these tastings, and now they have the opportunity to. And
Engage.
honestly, I think it's fantastic.
No, it's true. And even just tonight, it's funny you mention that because even just tonight, I didn't know this until right near the end of the tasting, but someone made a comment saying, "Oh, thanks so much." There's a new member, and he said, "Thanks so much. This is my first tasting with you guys." It's like your first experience with the society is a virtual one, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I'm one of those people as well, by the way, that I don't take any as in like I don't take any differentiation between virtual and in person.
Yeah.
As in like it's a bit like that phrase from my in a marketing head that I work in. There's no such thing as digital advertising. It's just advertising. Well, look, we'll come back to that one. But I mean, it's like there's no such thing as a virtual tasting. It's a tasting. Whether you are enjoying it in your living room or you're enjoying it at a venue, you're enjoying it somewhere, and it's being hosted. The fact that you add a camera to that equation doesn't mean that it's changed it. It's just more the medium of which you enjoy it. It has changed it, but it's just more for the medium to which you enjoy it. And I think that's what I'm saying is we've got to stop putting them on two different pedestals. They're the same thing. Yeah. They're part of one sphere of enjoyment that can be had, rather than being sort of like, well, it's this or the other. And I think that is the crucial approach here. And that's the same with there's no such thing as in advertising. You don't just advertise onto a billboard, or you don't just advertise onto Facebook, whatever. It's like you use one or the other, use both, and you use. It's a combination. It's one mixed. It's one full message, I should say. It's a mixed platform, full message, and that's the same with tastings. The experience it needs to translate well into the medium, but it doesn't need to be anything more than that.
No, I think that's completely fair enough, and I think that, of course, these digital tastings, when you can have a whiskey tasting in your living room, you're going to be a lot more at ease than when you take a taxi to a bar or someone drives you and then they pick you up. So I think it's not. I wouldn't say, as you say, I wouldn't say it's changed for the better. I wouldn't say it's changed it for the worse. It's changed it, but they are still the same thing in a weird way.
No, now it's the same thing. You're going to an experience, whether you are going to sit down at home and enjoy it, you're going to a venue. The experience level needs to be of a standard and enjoyment that you do one or the other, and it doesn't really affect you either way.
No, the only thing that's changed is location. Have you noticed that your tastings have gotten bigger during this time?
No, not immediately. I'd say they'd be. I mean, the online tastings each time have been on par with a big Sydney tasting, but I wouldn't say they're like sort of 120 to 150 guests. But I wouldn't say they've been on. I wouldn't say it's sort of like it's sort of the large tasting of sort of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Hobart combined, or anything like that. It's I think at the moment a lot of people have gone into that sort of like they're still separating them, and it's sort of still like, well, I'll just wait until events come back. And when we cancelled a whole bunch of our events actually online, not online events, when we cancelled a whole bunch of events coming up because of COVID back in February or whatever it was when we did it, February, March, when we were cancelling all the events, unfortunately. I mean, we owed all these members site credit for the ticket they purchased. Most members just held on to it. Said, "You guys hold on to it." Sorry, they told us, "Just hold on to my purchase. I'll buy it when it comes back, when everything comes back." And that's fine. I mean, we'll do that because we will come back. But it's not so much that it's the fact that we get to that experience will change, of course. And of course, I don't think we're going back to any sort of version of. I don't mean to sound like a doomsayer here, but I think but yeah, I think it's changed for a while now.
Yeah, sorry about that. Something popped up and I had to get rid of it.
Right.
Now, as we've mentioned multiple times, you're in Australia, and I know that most of the viewership that this channel tends to get is UK based, UK and Ireland based. Can you, because I know the Australian whiskey regulations because there's not much. Can you walk us through them?
So Australian whiskey regulations.
Yeah, what defines a whiskey in Australia?
For Australian whiskey, right?
Yeah.
You know what? How long have you got? Because this is a stupid minefield, but I'm really excited by it. Look, okay, let me give some context to those who are in the UK who watch this. Okay, Australian whiskey is causing a bit of a wave at the moment, as it has done for the last few years. People are paying attention to what's happening down here, and for good reason. There is some great whiskey being made in Australia. However, there's some not great whiskey being made here at the moment, and that's not the result of being hampered by laws or restrictions or anything like that. That's more the result of impatience and lack of funds. So now let me rewind a bit here. The modern Australian whiskey industry as we know it today can be dialed back to 1992. So that was the year that Cradle Mountain and Lark Distillery kicked off. Actually, I don't want to get my stats wrong here, but Lark definitely 1992. Cradle Mountain were definitely distilling just before then, but they all sort of kicked off. The 1992 is sort of the landmark year for Bill and Lynn Lark. And ever since then, we've now down the barrel at 28 years of the modern Australian whiskey industry. And I say modern because there's been one of my favorite Australian whiskey stats is that there was a distillery in Melbourne that were making whiskey in 1822. So it's recorded they were making whiskey in 1822. There was a distillery that opened in Scotland in 1824 called Glenlivet. And they proudly called Glenlivet's tagline for years was the one that started it all. It was one of their sort of taglines, the first distillery kind of line. And I'm always like, not only were they the first distillery in Scotland, they weren't even the first in the world. There was whiskey being made, a single malt being made in Australia 2 years earlier. So look, there's the old era, the 1800s of Australian whiskey. Then there was the sort of the mid era of 1950s to 1980s sort of era of whiskey, which was mostly pretty bad product. It was all, very, very bad stuff. Take 1950s Scottish blends and then knock them down another 10 notches. And now you've got the modern era, and then you've sort of got the postmodern era, which I'd say is sort of actually 2018 onwards. So we don't have the same. There's no SWA in Australia. Let me just make that clear. There's no Scotch Whisky Association. There's no association saying, well, you must use only this type of wood. You must mature this long. There is, well, that's not strictly true. The Australian Tax Office, the ATO, dictates that you must mature for a minimum of 2 years. Same as Ireland, same as most of the world. Scotland, of course, has their 3 year, but in the rest of the world,
I should point out the Irish regulations are 3 years.
Have they moved to 3? Is that a
They
recent?
moved to 3 quite a while ago.
Well, I need to update my brain on that one. Okay, I thought it was 2 in Ireland. Anyway, it's.
If you look up, just if you want to look it up at any point in time, if you look up Irish whiskey technical file, that will tell you everything you need to know. It's a landfill as well. But
wasn't I the whiskey expert? No, I'm just kidding. I'm winding you up. Okay, look, but the truth be told, though, it's like you're right though. Look, it's the thing is it's changed. A lot has changed, as we said, in Australian whiskey over the last 28 years, especially. The good thing going for Australia at the moment is that in Tasmania, the climate is not too dissimilar to Scotland. It's a cold island down there. It is warmer than Scotland, but it's not. It's not too dissimilar. So it can provide the opportunity for long aging. And we've seen a lot, not anymore, but we used to see a lot of things, not a lot either, but 12 to 16-year-old malts coming out of Tasmania for a while there. Heartwood bottled a bunch of them. Sullivan's Cove bottled heaps of them. Lark bottled a whole bunch as well. Even now, I mean, the average age of a lot of whiskey coming out of Tasmania is thankfully at least 7 to 9 years old. So there's still a lot of good old stock coming out. The bad side of the Australian whiskey industry is, of course, the reputation that Nant has left on the scene of their barrel investment scheme of ripping hundreds and hundreds of people off with barrels that never existed.
Yep.
And guaranteed returns on investment that sound too good to be true because they're too good to be true.
And then after that, they sold cattle that never existed.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. I forgot about that. But that is true, yes. And, they sold cattle, they sold spirit, they sold rum, they sold casks, they sold all sorts of stuff that never existed. It was all smoke and mirrors. I will leave my my personal take out of that one for the moment. But in terms of the actual Australian whiskey industry, we don't have too many regulations. It needs to be 2 years aged in wood, which is why some distillers have now worked with red gum. Obviously, most goes into oak, but you see a bit of red gum, you see a bit of ash, you see a bit of chestnut, stuff like that in terms of wood types, to varying results. The real problem, however, is the 20 to 50 litre realm of small cask aging, which provides obviously a much higher surface of wood to spirit ratio, matures the spirit faster. But by that, I mean you end up with, after 2 years, with this over oaked, under matured spirit. And a lot of them put it into a fancy 500 ml bottle for $350 in the hopes that it's rare because there's only 28 bottles. Well, of course, there's only 28 bottles because it's a 20 litre cask. So anyway, there's pros and cons to everything going on at the moment. And it ends up with these really, really thick, tannic whiskies. And I'm talking like in the UK, it's a bit like Aberlour Abuna, but on steroids, and not in a good way. It's like it's way too tannic, way too much wood influence, and you end up with this whiskey that is hot, dry, and not desirable. However, when it's funny. When Australian distillers start actually putting spirit into good ex-bourbon oak, or even just good refill sherry, you start getting some actual results. Even ex-Australian wine casks. I'm very skeptical of wine casks. I find most of the time they don't work, but sometimes if it does work, it's very good. So, look, that's the lay of the land at the moment. And the good side is, as I said, there's a postmodern flip happening in Australian whiskey at the moment. We're seeing what I like to call the 2018 onwards era of new distilleries actually putting spirit into 200 litre casks, actually releasing quality spirit. And I am only talking from 18. So some of the releases are only 2 years old now, but they're coming along very nicely. And there's also some great experimentation. I won't even say experimentation. Some great development in rye happening in Australia, which is great to see. Some amazing rye whiskies. In fact, big shout out to Archie Rose in Sydney, who at the World Whiskey Awards won the world's best rye, beating out every American rye, a country known for its rye whiskies. So you go, okay, that's kind of cool. There's actually development happening in great rye whiskies. It's a rye malt whiskey. It's malty. It's rye base. It's fantastic. I've been through 3 or 4 bottles myself. It's a ripper whiskey. So there's some great stuff happening at some of the middle to bigger distilleries, but some of the smaller ones I still think have some corners to curb, and I think we've still got a long way to go. But it's looking bright. It is looking bright. But I keep reminding people who ask about Australian whiskey, we're 28 years in to the modern industry. It's like asking, what did Ardbeg look like in 1840, 40 years after they'd been open? Probably not very good. Probably just mostly new make spirit that had been slushed about in a cask, or if at all.
See, because one of the reasons I asked that, firstly, I want to say thanks at the start of that for mentioning Cradle Mountain.
Oh, sure.
Because I quite like. I don't think Cradle Mountain has released great whiskey. I think they've released drinkable whiskey over time. But also, I just think every time I hear someone ever mention Australian distilling, it all starts with Bill Lark. And I love Bill Lark. I love Lark. I think they're fantastic. But I do always think it's disappointing that people neglect to mention Cradle Mountain, which also in its own way did kind of help.
Well, actually, yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, everyone always mentions Bill as the founder. I actually didn't even say his name that whole time. What I would say is that the founders of Australian whiskey should be probably attributed to Bob Hosking and Lynn Lark. Lynn is the engine of that distillery. She absolutely she was the distiller. She ran the stills there in the early days. She was making the spirit come off the stills. Bill is very good at marketing. Larkin was obviously he's part of it. He's a huge part of it. He's Bill Lark. But a huge credit to Lynn on that, and Bob Hosking over at Cradle Mountain and his efforts of starting that distillery even before he could obtain a license for it. There's got to be credit where credit is due, and I think that's really important. But of course, I'm also going to say like other names critical in the early '90s of jump starting that industry. Patrick Maguire comes to mind from Sullivan's Cove, and oh, look, there's a whole bunch of names I can't recall at the top of my head right now, but they were all integral of creating what the Australian whiskey industry is today. Mark Nicholson. So yeah, look, yeah, absolutely. But huge shout out to Lynn and of course the whole Lark family.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've always loved, by the way, Cradle Mountain. I think it's the whiskey that they call Small Concern. Is that it?
Yeah, the Small Concern Distillery. Yes.
Because I always, in my mind, because it's a small concern to the tax man. You don't need to look here. It's only a small concern. Got bigger ones. That's how, I don't know if that's what they did, but I really hope it is, because that's thematically in my mind, that just works to such levels.
Oh, that's great, because it's important. I mean, it's like, well, it's a fun distillery that I don't know where they're at the moment these days. I know they're still spruiking their glass, and they designed a glass which kind of looks like a variation of the Canadian Glencairn in design. It's like a sort of the neat. Do you remember the neat glass, the Canadian neat glass thing?
Give me a moment.
Oh, here we go. I knew he'd have one. Hello, everyone. It's just me here now.
Now I've got the neat glass. Is this the one you're referring to?
Yeah. So the Cradle Mountain glass they've designed from calling it the Cradle glass, though I think it's called, it looks like a variation of that. I still prefer Copperters or Riddell's, or sorry, not Riddell's, Spiegelau's and our Society Spirit Snifter, stuff like that for appreciating whiskey. But for drinking whiskey, I can see why a glass like that would be quite good.
See, I quite like it. I mean, it's very weird. I'm in Antwerp, staying at my partner's father's apartment because he works here, and I was here for a couple of months working through Europe. So I've got a wide variety of whiskey glasses stashed here. So I've got the Nolan glass, the Black Edition Nolan glass, which was a Christmas present, which I can't say I notice any difference on the nose, but it does feel fantastic in my hand. I will give it that.
I was wondering what glass you're using. What is that? What have you got there? What is it? It's the Nolan, is it?
Yeah, this is the Nolan glass, but it's the matte black edition. So this was a special edition they put out, and someone saw it and remembered I like whiskey and bought it for me for Christmas. Christmas is most often just whiskey-related stuff, which is great. I love whiskey stuff.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, everyone loves whiskey stuff in their stocking. I'm going to go with I'm going to call it the Nolan. Here we go. I'm going to call it the Nolan Matt Bailey edition. There it is, because it's got the word Matt in it, so I'm replacing it. Sorry, mate. That's now happened.
I think Nolan might take issue with that. I don't know, but definitely for the time being, I will continue to call it the Matt Bailey edition until they tell me otherwise. But it is really nice. But you know, the neat glass as well. I've got a couple of Glencairns, but yeah. That's great stuff. But I really love, and this is one of the things that I most hated leaving behind in Australia. I had a D&L glass, a Denver and Lily, very early on.
Yeah.
I really love the Denver and Lily. I think in the hand, it just sits so nicely. I think it gives a great nose. The palate, not so much. But I'm a big fan of that glass. I think it's really something special. And I've always been annoyed that I left it in Melbourne. I'll be going back in October or so because my sister's getting married. So I'll be returning to Australia for that. First time in 4 years. And then I'll be there until they let me leave again. So that's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Big shout out to Denver Kramer and Lily for putting that glass together. I was just going to say on that point, I always split my glassware into two categories: whiskey appreciation and whiskey drinking. And if I'm appreciating a whiskey, assessing it, writing notes on it, I would use something like I'd use something like this. But if I'm enjoying whiskey, drinking whiskey, the D&L, great glass, great stuff.
Yeah, no, I can agree with that.
Absolutely.
So, what were we talking about then? Yes. So, Cradle Mountain. I've completely lost that train of thought that we had.
We're talking about Australian whiskey. You were asking some of the things going on.
That's right. So the main reason I wanted to ask that is because we had a 2 or 3 tweet Twitter conversation, like, I don't know, 2 months back.
Okay.
Where you were talking about what you would change in the Australian whiskey.
It was probably one of the more, probably one of the more controversial tweets I've done. But yes, I got that. Yeah.
No. I mean. So what's your view? What would you change in the regulations?
Now I don't recall the exact details of that tweet, but I will say that I would introduce a minimum cask size, and I know that's a little bit controversial because it does hamper some of the smallest, like the micro distilleries who are buying smaller casks. I would introduce a minimum cask size, and that minimum cask size would be 100 liters. I don't think that's too. I don't think that's too much of a stretch of the of what it should be. And I know I'll get pushback on that for sure, and I know why. But so I'm fully respectful of that. But at the same time, I'd introduce if I was creating an SWO in Australia, it would involve minimum cask size. Minimum age already exists here of 2 years. I'm happy with that. I've actually tasted some incredible 2-year-old spirit from Australia. And that's mostly rye as well, I'll be honest. What else? I mean, really, that's. Oh, actually, you know what? Here it is. This is the big one. I would introduce a law that makes it that what is on the label is what's in the bottle. Now, you'd be surprised that does not always exist here, and that's something you can very easily get away with. I'm not going to say which distillery, but there's a distillery in McLaren Vale region of South Australia that should narrow it down very, very much for anyone watching. That was releasing for a long time a lot of whiskey under their brand of calling it, Glen Wonka single malt, when it wasn't even from that distillery. And it's happened in gin as well. There's a Tasmanian gin, again, shall remain nameless. I'm not here to libel any brands. There's a Tasmanian gin where the gin, the juniper, the botanicals, and the distillation all happen in Adelaide. And then it's bottled in Tasmania. Is that a Tasmanian gin anymore? I don't know about that. So it's kind of like I would introduce things like what's on the label has to be what it is. They call that a Tasmanian gin. Our mate over in South Australia calls that Distillery X whiskey when it isn't. And it's a bit like what happens in rum. Of course, it's not a bit like, it's exactly what happens in rum, but in the rum world. But it's also a little bit of what happens in America. Although America's a little bit different, you can have a Whistle Pig bourbon there's no such thing as Whistle Pig Distillery. It's all MGP juice, and that's fine. I've got no problem with it coming out of MGP. In fact, MGP makes some of the best bourbons in the world, and best ryes. Whereas I've got a problem where it's deliberately deceiving of saying, well, this is Distillery X when it isn't. And you can't get away with that in Scotch whiskey at all. And that's like, I can't release a Scotch whiskey called Glenmorangie because that already exists. And it's not their spirit and it's not my brand. So this is what I mean. We need a bit more protectionism of what's actually in this bottle needs to be in the glass.
It's really curious because about a month ago, I was actually living in Ireland. I lived in Ireland for about 18 months. And that's a big argument that's happening within the Irish industry at this point in time, because if you go back 15 years, you had 4 or so distilleries within Ireland. There's I'd say 24 distilleries in Ireland. The ones with juice on the market, there's still only, I want to say 10 or so. Now, for anyone who's watching, who's from from Ireland and is in the whiskey community, I guarantee you'll tell me that I'm wrong, and by all means do. Let us know in the comments how many there actually are. But Irish whiskey brands I'd say there would have to be 100 or so. I've not counted, but definitely there has to be that. And there is that argument right now of you do have to let people know. Now, I do know on companies' websites, anytime there is a tasting, and sometimes on the bottle as well, companies are very clear with we are bonders or we are bottlers. We do not have a distillery, and they've been very clear with that.
There's nothing wrong with gypsy distilling. It works really well in the wine industry. It works really well in the beer industry. So there's nothing wrong with that. However, the problem is when they're deceiving consumers into what's different in the bottle is what's on the label. And that's actual deception. I mean, look, if you ask Jack Teeling, like who I know quite well, and you say to Jack, where did you get this spirit? He'd say, oh, it's Cooley. Yeah, okay, it's Cooley. Fine. And they're building a new distillery, and this is happening now, and we're building on this. Great. They don't hide it. Hyde, however, if we're talking Irish whiskey, well, that's a different story. Hyde's in a bit of a sort of a funny ballpark of, and I know I'm naming brands here, but I don't work in the Irish whiskey industry, so too bad. But that's what I mean. Like this, Hyde is in a different story. They actual misleading of what their spirit is. So that's what I'm saying. There's a fine line between gypsy distilling and hiding what you're doing. And I think, as I said before, whiskey education level and general consumer knowledge is going up. So therefore, they deserve better, and the industry deserves better as well.
Well, I think it's funny you mention that, because mentioning Hyde, there is one Irish whiskey brand that springs to mind for me, and that was the brand St. Patrick's Distillery.
Right.
Now, that was the brand name.
Right.
Was St. Patrick's Distillery. That is a red flag immediately. And when your brand has a word in its name that directly infers that you have a distillery, that's a red flag. I don't know how that passed by so many people, but that's something that's always, I believe recently they've had to change their brand, but for years and years they stood as that, and that was very interesting. Yeah, that was quite something.
It's problematic, and it's one that I would. So if there was two things, just to finish on that question, it'd be in Australian industry, it'd be minimum cask size 100 liters, and I don't mind people maturing stuff in 20 and 50s, but don't call it whiskey, call it something else. But if there's, and the other one is the what's on the label has to be where it comes from, and that really shouldn't be one that I have to argue very strongly for.
No, that's completely true. Even if you are a distillery and you are distilling your own malt, I think in the meantime, you should be putting somewhere, you should be having a disclaimer. At least say, this is blah, blah, this is blah, blah, blah brand, and this bottle contains liquid from this distillery. I realize that NDAs can get in the way of that, but surely there does have to be a workaround for it. Mick Henry's did that, didn't they? The first McHenry's whiskey was from Sullivan's Cove, wasn't it?
You may be right on that. I remember. I actually do remember batch one coming out, and I'm good friends with Sam and Bill over at the distillery. Great team there, and their new layout of it's the function center there can host like 900 people or something. It's ridiculous. It's great. No, it's great. They've got a really cool setup they're working on there. I'm going to get that number wrong, but it's a lot of people. Yeah, McHenry's, I don't know about their first release, but I know what they've produced since then has been fantastic. I reckon they have one of the better gins, and I reckon the aged stocks of what I've tasted so far, 7, 8, 9-year-old ex-bourbon barrels, they're mostly maturing ex-bourbon. That's a huge tick for me. Massive tick. Put whiskey into ex-bourbon. Stop putting it into wacky wine casks that produce hot tannic spirit. But it's I think that's a good example of a distillery maybe like. But see, I bet you the thing is, I bet you if you ask them, was your first release Sullivan Spirit? And a lot of distilleries borrowed Sullivan Spirit in those days. They'd probably say yes. I mean, look at all the distillers that used to use the word Glenlivet on their labels in Scotland. You know, the Glenlivet Macduff, the Glenlivet Aberlour. You know, like that was this is we're sort of experiencing that in Australia for an era there in 24.
But no, that's a different thing because the Glenlivet, putting Glenlivet on your label helped to market your bottling, but it's not strictly because you were using spirit from the distillery. That's simply because
No.
at that point in time, the Speyside regional turned it. I understand what you're saying, though. And also to Mick Henry's, if I have gotten that wrong, and it wasn't you, it was someone else, I do apologize for that. There's a lot of distilleries in Australia. It's been a long consecutive time since I've been back. And I apologize if I did give false information there.
It's 270 something now.
It's always funny when I was in Ireland, when I was in Scotland, when I'm in England, when I'm in Belgium, and everyone talks about the growth of the industry, and Scotland's up to, I don't know, I'm just going to ballpark 150 or so.
Close, a little bit under.
Ireland's probably about, I don't know, 30, 36, a couple of dozen. England has roughly, I want to say 24, 25. Right. I know I'm going to get corrected about this. Belgium's got a few as well. And everyone always spoke to me about the growth of the industry. And I always said, it's funny when you say that because you've got to look at places like Australia, which has, 270 odd distilleries, and Germany, because Germany has about 300 distilleries.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, a lot of these places in Australia and in Germany, I'm sure you'd agree that a lot of these distilleries is one bloke in a tin shed with a still. It's not a full operation.
Well, that's the Australian one, of course. That's very much the Australian thing. You got to remember, most distilleries in Australia, like a lot of them are like, we produce 5,000 liters a year. Cool. It's like you're barely doing like whatever. It's like 1,000 liters a week at best, maybe, and that's like a massive. That's quite big. Even some that do 1,000 liters a year. And in Germany's case, God, how many of those distilleries are producing sort of grappas and fruit spirits? I mean, so many.
About 75%. Yeah, 3/4 of them are just fruit liqueur, grappa distilleries, or even breweries that just have a still, and they're like, you know what, let's run this stuff that makes whiskey. But the problem is when someone from Scotland and Ireland and England says, well, that's not a proper distillery, and you're like, well, historically, you've always called that a distillery, and nowadays, even with the past 30 years, you do have some guys who are very small, and you always start small as well. As well as that, people do say, well, we don't see the whiskies over here. My argument is always, well, we don't see most Irish whiskey in Australia. You don't have the quantity and you don't have the shipping available to transport the spirit to what is the other side of the world.
Well, and it's also market saturation. How many distillers could you possibly have on a shelf in a retailer or a bar? And that shelf space has become increasingly crowded, and the balance between distributors and brands has shifted dramatically in the last 5 years, which is amazing to see. That's another discussion. But I mean, in Irish whiskey, for those in the UK, the Irish whiskey scene in Australia is Bushmills, which is hard to find to begin with, but Bushmills, Jameson, Teeling, Hyde, and Dead Rabbit. That's about it. It's like I might be missing one or two. Sorry but it's just it's really quite a small field of releases.
Sorry. Well, I mean, the big thing with that is that whenever you talk to anyone in the Irish whiskey industry about them, I know it firsthand when you're looking towards America, because America is the big kind of whiskey grail that everyone wants to go to.
Yeah.
But as well as that, I mean, if your entire industry is built from 80% sales on one brand, there are some Irish whiskeys that I would crawl over broken glass for. They are fantastic.
Oh yeah, same here. Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting. I'm curious about the next 10 years within Irish whiskey. I'm very curious about who comes onto the scene and stays, and who falls off. I think it's going to be something very interesting to see. Basing on that, yourself, who are you interested to see whiskey from? Who and where around the world?
Oh. Ooh. Okay. I'm going to give two answers here. The first answer is Waterford. out of Ireland. I know we're talking about, but I'm hugely fascinated by what's happening at Waterford. Only because
have you had the Gatorade?
Come on. No. Maybe I have. I just think that I just look. My introduction to whiskey was basically Mark Rainier's era at Brookladdy. So 2001, I showed interest in whiskey. So and then 2004, 5, 6, I started collecting different things and finding different things and discovering all those weird and sometimes terrible and sometimes fantastic releases out of Brookladdy from that era. There was some shockers in that sort of mid 2000s era. However, I was fascinated by the approach. And while I don't completely bite into the terroir apple that Mark Rainier does these days, I still think that what he does could be quite beneficial to the entire Irish industry, but also to Waterford as a distillery. And I've done the virtual tour of that distillery. I've not actually been to it, but I've done the virtual tour, and you go, that's actually really cool. There's some solid old equipment, some large scale production, and the opportunity to really experiment there. So it's like, okay, that just gets me interested to begin with. So that's one. The second distillery I'm going to do notable mention for, who I think are to keep an eye on, is and I've got huge hopes for in the future, and even now, is Fleurieu Distillery. So Fleurieu are based in South Australia. Great distillery. And there was a moment about 2 years ago that I had a chat with Gareth and Angela over there, and they said, caught up with them at Oak Barrel in Sydney, and I said, what's your maturation look like? What are you doing these days? What's happening over at Fleurieu? And Gareth said, we're doing about whatever it was, 2 casks a day or something at the time. I said, great. And he said, we're pretty much smallest cask size we're going to work with a Hoggies, so 225 litre. I was like, hogsheads, Australian whiskey, bring it on. I was like, so you're actually going to lay down substantial spirit, you're going to mature it, have some long maturation, and you're going to actually, and even the young Fleurieu's have tasted have been great. So they've got a good spirit base, they've got a great distiller, they've got a great team there. So, and I'm really looking forward to what Fleurieu are doing. I mean, notable mention, actually, my third one, which I've got a soft spot for, and I'm not going to, I know it's easy to name a distillery in Campbelltown, so I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to say Westland. Now, yep. I know Westland's already cool. That's fine. Seattle whiskey's already thing, but it's I still think they produce an amazing whiskey, and we've had 1 or 2 Westlands, or there's another one coming at the SMWS, and I think just that approach to their spirit and what they do, I think is fantastic. So, there you go. I'm going to go with Waterford, Fleurieu, and Westland for tonight.
Now, firstly, Fleurieu, I managed to try. I don't know if this was their spirit, but my final week in Scotland, I think it was, there was oh my god, what are the names of the 2 guys who run Whiskey Ailment?
Oh, Brooke and Jules.
Brooke and Jules. I'm picking myself back at that. Brooke and Jules actually came over to Scotland, and they did a Australian whiskey tasting at the Vaults, and I wasn't invited along. I just kind of said, I worked here for 2 years, and you kind of owe me something, and I want to be at this Australian. I thought I was, no. I gave a lot during my time. I deserved at least one tasting that I wasn't presenting. But it was amazing, and I tried the Fleurieu, and oh my god, I only got his name. Is it Matt? Who's the fella from Sydney? Who's the current guy at SMWS? He's not the chairman. Is he the CEO?
In Australia? No,
in Scotland.
Oh, David Ridley.
David. I don't know why I was. Well, your name's.
Yeah.
So David came over me. David sniffed it and immediately walked over me and said, "This smells like burger rings."
Burger rings.
And that was the first example of Fleurieu that I ever had. And I thought it was fantastic. And that was a great tasting, by the way. Whiskey Element is a fantastic bar. I
Yeah.
used to spend too much time there. I used to spend my time between work there, my home, and more often than not, Bad Frankie in Fitzroy.
Yeah, Bad Frankie's great. Yeah.
Oh my God, Seb is bloody amazing.
Seb's good. Seb's a good egg.
Seb's a good egg. Westland, I recall, I like a bit of Westland. My disappointment was that when the society released Westland, a lot of it was bought up immediately and then resold, and that's always been a bit of a problem with the society. But that's always going to happen. People are always going to resell it. You can't change that.
I'll just make two very quick points on that. I mean, I can understand why that happened. It's a .1, the one you would have seen, and it was Speakeasy Sneaky Peaky or something it was called. It was a .1, spicy and sweet profile. It was a great whiskey, and I can understand why it would be immediately flipped. But the second thing is, there was recently an email put out by David Ridley, actually, to all members in the UK and Europe about how the society is taking active steps now against flippers, which is we've always said it's against the terms. We've always said we're not here for you to buy and flip. We're here for you to buy and enjoy.
Yeah.
They're taking active steps now and seeking out which members are doing it and cancelling memberships and whatnot. So yeah.
No, I would agree with that because I think what the society does is fantastic, and I think the whiskies they do are fantastic. My problem with flipping has always been when you take a product that is amazing and you flip it, especially when someone, when I spoke to someone about this the other day, and then they said they had bought 2 cases of not a society bottling, but of a first release from a new distillery that was in Europe. You have all the information there. And they bought it, and by bottle it cost them about €75. And then they were flipping it, and they were making €250 on every single bottle. And my argument was that means that what you've done is you've bought 2 cases, you've drunk one of them. That means that 11 people who wanted to try this whiskey, myself included, because I couldn't get a bottle, didn't get to drink the whiskey. And that's really disappointing because that turns whiskey into stocks.
Oh, it turns into a commodity, yeah, and it's not one that it just purely rips the enjoyment out like a Band-Aid. It just takes the enjoyment out of whiskey for me entirely. I did a live stream on this the other night, actually, about 3 or 4 nights ago, about how there's 3 types of whiskey drinkers and whiskey people in this world, broadly speaking: whiskey drinkers, whiskey collectors, and whiskey flippers. And I have no problem with the first two. If you buy and you drink, I've got a good friend of mine, actually. I don't mind calling him out, Esmond, lovely guy, based here in Sydney. He drinks. I went to a tasting of his just last weekend where he opened 10 different Kalilas that were all 30 years plus. And you're like, cool. Like the way that he operates, I love this guy. He's got almost a standing rule that as soon as the bottle arrives, he literally rips the seal off as soon as it arrives in his house. It's like he knows he's going to drink that because he's going to know he's going to enjoy it. So you've got whiskey drinkers. I'm a whiskey drinker, but I'm also a whiskey collector. I have a few bottles that I've stashed away, not too many, that I've collected so that I can open at a later date. Simple as that. I want to open them birth date, milestone, anniversary, whatever. Like open them, pardon me, on a special occasion with people who I know will appreciate it. But I'm not going to buy whiskey with the express intent of selling it. That point for me is completely lost because the return isn't that great. It's like, great, you might make $50 more on something that you never got to enjoy. Cool. Who cares? Whereas on the side it's just, you're inflating the secondary of something that other people didn't get to enjoy. Like it's just awful all around.
Well, I mean, the main thing with that, and I've had big arguments with people about this, is my girlfriend's, she's doing university. She's doing a master's at the moment. And whenever I went to, whenever I see her friends, I always talk to them about whiskey because that's just what I do. I love whiskey. I love talking about it to everyone in walks of life. And one of the big things they tell me is they don't want to get into whiskey because they can't afford it. They see inflated prices at bottle shops and online from people who drive up the secondary market has an influence on the primary market, and it artificially drives up prices. And that dissuades new drinkers from coming into whiskey. And I think that's an awful thing. For you to make a couple of bucks, you have stopped a couple of dozen people coming in. And every time that you make that flip, you stop people. And that's a really horrible thing, because why wouldn't you want to share whiskey?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's it really annoys me. Anyway, that's enough of that. The last one you mentioned there, Waterford. I will spend very little time on Waterford because I am not convinced, but I'm not convinced mainly because of the price. Now, I realize everything that's gone into it, but I think whenever a distillery is charging that much for a first release, they're charging 80, 90 euro. I'm not prepared to spend that to find out if the science experiment has worked. I also do not agree with a lot of the stuff that's been put out by the marketing. We do have, one of the big things I've seen is that people are saying Waterford are the first place on earth in whiskey or in wine to make a study into terroir and see if it exists. That's completely false. You can Google terroir study wine, put that through Google, and you will find dozens upon dozens of studies that come to results. And I think, I'd love to try it.
I was more fascinated by what they'll bring in the future, and what more to that effect of what influence even if it's their marketing, what influence their marketing will bring to the greater Irish development of Irish whiskey, which of course has been touted as the next big thing for about the last 5 years. But it's and I think whether it is or isn't really the point. But the point is that we'll see I think a growth in that category as the result of, I think, taking it, like I say, even if it's marketing, a different approach, and saying it's not all just sort of like Paddy McMullen's special blend and proper Conor McGregor's special 12 or whatever. I think we again, Irish whiskey deserves a bit of maturity, market maturity. I'm going to talk here, not spirit maturity. And I think that's
no. I mean that's a perfectly reasonable argument to make, and I do agree with you. But no one can deny that what Conor McGregor's special 12 as proper 12 did was bring a huge amount of new drinkers into the Irish whiskey category. And as much as it did. I worked in a I was working in a whiskey shop in Ireland when that was released. Now, the amount of new customers we sold out, within an hour of getting a delivery of Proper 12. It would sell out. The amount of people who came back, asked for it, and we said, it's sold out. And they said, oh, well, I'm new to whiskey. That was the first bottle of whiskey I've ever bought. What else can I have?
Yeah, no,
that was stunning. That was great to see.
And I don't doubt that. Market maturity, however, what I meant is that market maturity of Waterford, what they'll do for the growth of the industry, I think will be quite good.
I'd love to see it. I'm not convinced, but
we'll see.
I am willing to be wrong on this. I am more than willing. Now, Jesus, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. I've asked you pretty much none of the questions I had prepared, by the way. I'm pretty excited about that.
It is getting late here.
I guess the last thing I want to ask there, before we move on to the quiz and anagram section.
Okay.
Last thing I want to ask is, in what ways would you like to see the whiskey community supporting the whiskey industry at this time?
Whiskey community supporting the industry. I mean, that's a hard one. I mean, I think the best way to support the whiskey industry from the community standpoint would be to support the community. And I know that sounds a bit vague, but it's kind of like if you're supporting your fellow community about, the enjoyment and appreciation of whiskey, then the industry benefits anyway. I don't worry too much about the industry, and I don't even use that word for it, because I think it'll be it's almost self-fulfilling. You need that community to build that industry, and that it's one hand doesn't hold the hand of the other without it. So it's kind of, I think, just keep even post-COVID, as Australia starts to relax its restrictions, just keep going to tastings, visiting your great little local bars, and wherever possible, buy independent. And I'm not saying buy SMWS, because if you're a member, you're a member. You want to be, you don't want to be, that's fine. If I'm saying, if you want to, if you want to go to great bars, go to great bars. If you want to buy great bottles of whiskey, buy it from an independent retailer wherever possible. And big shout out to places like Nick's and the Oak Barrel and places like that do great independent or independent retailers that you're actually supporting. And I know there's a lot of fuss in Australia at the moment about Amazon and booze, but you know what? Just focus on the small guys, and the service and the growth will win rather than Jeff Bezos.
I think that's important for the small guys to win rather than the richest man in the world, the richest man that has ever been. I think that's important. That's great. Yeah. And all right. So with all that out of the way, and that was a great answer, I love that. With all that out of the way, we will move on to the questions and anagrams round. Now, the background to this, I always like to try and find out a hobby or an interest of whoever is on the broadcast and pair it with whiskey. And Matt, you said you have a master's in classical music. Is that it?
Bachelor of music, bachelor of classical performance.
Bachelor of classical performance, and you play the trumpet.
That's right.
That is right. So for your questions today, I have taken some joinings of music and whiskey.
Ah, okay. I'm enjoying this. Okay, good.
And that's what I'm going to be asking you about.
Okay.
Okay. So first one I've got for you. Which whiskey sponsored an instrumental concert which included Rash Naninov's Piano Concert No. 2, Concerto for Orchestra by Bartók, as well as Poetic Rusland and Ludmilla Overture by Glinka.
Which whiskey sponsored it?
Yes, this was a whiskey distillery and brand very famous that sponsored and put on this concert. I believe the concert was in Hong Kong a couple of years back.
Now I know Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra quite well. It's got a famous trumpet excerpt that I can play off the top of my head any day of the week. That's that. But I'm going to go with Macallan.
You were completely right. It is Macallan. That was the Bravo series.
Yes. Yeah. Right. There you go. There was a Macallan sponsorship. I think the Hong Kong gave it away, because I was trying to think where they would have activated that, and I think it was Macallan in Hong Kong. Well done. Yeah. There you go. Cool.
All right. That's the kind of theme of these questions. I worked hard on these.
Thanks, mate. I'm ready.
So, this is a two-parter.
Okay.
And this is only vaguely related to music. Which independent bottler released the Don Galleone, a release of 2 bottles held within a padded violin case? You can name either the bottler that released it, or you can name the distillery that these bottles came from. It's a German bottler, and it is a closed distillery.
I don't know too many German bottlers other than Whiskey Facil. So I'm going to go with Whiskey Facil because I don't know the others. I'm sorry.
It's not Whiskey Facil, unfortunately.
Does it have a duck on the label?
The distillery, or I mean, I don't believe either the bottler or the distillery has this on the label.
No, I haven't got it then. No guess. I can't even guess.
Want to guess the distillery that the bottles came from? It's a closed distillery, one of the most famous closed distillery, not the most famous.
So not Port Ellen.
Yeah. It is Port Ellen.
Okay, it's Port Ellen. Sorry, I was going to say, is it Port Ellen? And I was like, if you said one of the most famous closed, I was like, is it Port Ellen or is it Brora? And I was like, I was going to go with Brora, but being the second most famous, maybe I'd call Port Ellen probably the most famous closed.
The thing is, the general attitude I've felt over in the UK is that Rosebank is the most famous closed
Oh,
distillery, which I don't get because Rosebank is nice. I'm not saying it's bad. Port Ellen is a much better whiskey.
I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that one.
All right, all right. Well, that's personal preference. That's personal.
Yeah. No, well, yeah, that's a subjective. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Which Japanese brand has released a series of bottles modeled after violins, pianos, and harps?
The answer is Yamazaki.
Is it Yamazaki?
Or it's not Yoichi. And it
I
wasn't.
mean, you're gonna have to remind me. I've got Suntory.
Oh, of course, Suntory. Yes. Well, okay. Well, okay. Hold on. Some of those were Yamazaki's. Okay. No, you're right though. You're right. It is Suntory as a brand. They were. Yes, it is a. Oh, I should have thought that one through.
It was put out under the Suntory Royal range.
Yes.
Yeah.
Suntory Royal. Yes, and they came in those gaudy packaging of violins and whatnot. I remember those ones.
Oh
And
my God! Don't. I mean, I'm sorry to anyone watching this who has some, but Christ, they look horrible.
no, they are horrible. They truly look. They are truly terrible looking releases, but surprisingly collectible. It seems as well.
Look, I mean that Port Ellen I spoke about, the Don Galleon, that's from Jack Weaver's Whiskey World, by the way.
Jack Weaver.
And
Oh, God, yes. Okay, sure.
well, that is two bottles of Port Ellen. There's a 1982 and a 1983, and the case is a like silk padded violin case.
Oh.
That looks amazing. No. That I really like that. The Suntory
I'm
Royal range.
funny about packaging. It's always just like every time I buy a whiskey that comes in some satin coffin box with clasps, I'm always like, how much am I paying for the whiskey and how much am I paying for this packaging? And as someone myself who's researched packaging options for different releases, it's kind of scary sometimes. It is.
Now I mean I love whenever I read a press release about a new whiskey release that's worth more money than I make in a year. You know? And they talk about the wood where to make the box, where that came from, and the history of the glass and everything. And I'm like, I just give a shit about the liquid. I'm sorry. I know that so much work has gone into this. But if I'm gonna buy a whiskey, I'm gonna buy it because I'm a whiskey drinker.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy it to drink it. I only care about
it. Yeah.
You can give it to me in a plastic bottle. Like, yeah.
Exactly. What are you going to do with it? Like, yeah, what are you going to do with it? It's like, yeah, anyway.
Anyway, all right.
Okay.
My last question about music and whiskey to you is,
okay,
which famous jazz artist made a ad in 1974 for Suntory?
Ooh, hold on a second. 74 Suntory ad.
American jazz artist.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm going to have two guesses if that's okay. I don't know the actual answer to this, but I think I'm pretty close. Was it Oscar Peterson?
It wasn't Oscar Peterson. If I say African American.
Well, I did say Oscar Peterson.
Other African. I think Rat Pack. I think that should be a good clue, unless my music knowledge is horrible.
No, I haven't got it. I don't. I can't even see the ad at the moment, but I know they did. I know they did something like that, like along those lines. And I'm racking my brain here. No, I haven't got it. Who was it?
He did a fantastic kind of jazz slow band cover of Mr. Bojangles.
Okay, well, I know the song. I can't even pick the artist though. I'm sorry.
It's Sammy Davis Jr.
Oh, of course it is. Of course he did. He was such a sellout. He did a whole bunch of ads for different products as well in the 70s, and they were all terrible.
I mean, you say no. You've got to watch this ad. This is a fantastic ad. This is absolutely amazing. This is Sammy Davis Jr. with a bottle of Suntory, pouring it in and just scatting. It is amazing.
right.
It's solid gold. If I knew how to play the ad over this, I would play the ad, but I don't. So I can't.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Well, I didn't do very
Now,
well at the quiz, but
I mean, I tried to match it to your to
no,
what
you
and
did.
I don't think I matched it.
No, but I don't know. I reckon it's left brain, right brain kind of thing. My music world and my whiskey world, they very, very rarely combine. So when you ask questions where they're actually combined, it's like, what? I'm trying to get to that, and it's like I can't get there yet.
I mean, I think you'll do fantastic in the anagrams, so I'm not worried for you. But the
Maybe.
most important thing as well is I've just recalled, I've got this written down. Do you know Fiona Shute?
On Twitter, yes.
Yeah. I think I've met Fiona once. Fiona's absolutely fantastic.
I don't think
and
but yeah, she's great.
I mean, she asked me to ask you a question.
Oh wow,
and it's very important. And I think I know what the answer is.
Okay.
But when will we see Society Australian bottlings? When will we see Australian whiskies bottled under the Society?
The shorter answer is when it's good enough. The long answer is, well, we're working on it, and we've got a whole bunch of distilleries that we're actually working with at the moment. When I say a whole bunch, a small handful of distilleries we're working with at the moment in sourcing, tasting, paneling, and selecting casks. So it's in progress. I've had a whole bunch of meetings with distilleries and the UK about Australian whiskey, and it's in production at the moment. The best things take time, but we are working on it. I know that sounds like a really diplomatic answer, but it's absolutely the truth. It's got to be
the thing about that answer is there's two great things about that answer. One, I knew that was the answer you'd give. Two, I knew that would be the answer you'd give because you and Campbell gave me that answer about 18 months ago.
Well, it's funny because 18 months ago there were a whole bunch of samples that were submitted that are no longer submitted, but there's now a new bunch of samples going through at the moment, and Panel have just tasted them recently. So look, there's work in progress here, and it's actually kind of exciting because when we do it, we want to get it really right. It's simple as that.
Yeah.
And as I said to you before, as I said earlier in the interview, we've there's the Australian whiskey industry the modern Australian whiskey industry is young, and we don't want to bottle something that we're not proud of, and we want to make sure that it's the right whiskey and that we've got a good regular supply from that distillery as well. We don't want to just be like, well, here's 145.1 and it was the only one we ever see. We want to see a few casks every year perhaps from that distillery. So it's got to be one that's got...
That's completely true. If you would like to practice something else, by the way, I am drinking, at this point in time, beneath the flat I am in, there is a Georgian wine shop.
Oh, nice.
And they also have some Georgian brandy. And
very cool.
Yeah, it's it's aged for 8 months. It's a Thomas brandy from Georgia. It's bloody good stuff, actually.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No one has sponsored me in any way to say that, by the way. No one sponsors this show. No one gives a shit about it. So,
okay.
You can say what you like on here, by the way. Okay.
Yeah, right. Well, and until the UK see it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. No, so you had an anagram or something you said, or?
I have 5 anagrams for you.
Well, I don't know if I'm good at anagrams, but okay. Try me out.
Everyone says that. Now, I should point out, by the way, that this is Malts with
Melody. Hey, I need a photo of that for my socials so I can get this out later.
I will do. I believe my partner has taken a photo of it already. Sorry. Right. For you, I've taken anagrams of a few Australian whiskey distilleries. And I'm very excited because I never get to do Australian whiskey distilleries. I always have to be Scottish. I'm running out of Scottish.
Okay.
So don't worry, by the way. You'll do fine of it. First anagram is heavy rollers.
Heady rollers. Heady rollers. I told you I'm terrible.
This is a distillery in Tasmania.
Well, that doesn't narrow it down too much. Devils? No, nah. What do you, okay. Okay, what have we got here? Okay, no, I haven't got it.
I mean, all right, think of it this way. It's a distillery in Tasmania that starts with an H.
Lloyd.
It's 2 words. First word starts with an H. Second word starts with an R. Northern Tasmania, around Burnie.
Yes. Helios Road.
Helios Road, yes.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I should be better at that. There you go. I told you I was terrible at anagrams. I'm not an anagram kind of person.
Don't worry. This is going to continue for a while.
Great.
I will give you clues to each of them because I'm a nice guy.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Your second anagram is I racehorse.
Is that 2 words?
No, they spell it as 2 words. This is in Sydney, well, around Sydney. We have spoken about them in this program. They have won an award.
Oh, Archie Rose. Sorry, yes. Archie Rose. Yes.
Archie Rose.
Well done. Sorry, yes. I saw. I got that at the race part, race horse part. Sorry, yes.
I should point out I have a lot of time on my hands nowadays to drink and make up anagrams. So.
Oh, good for you.
I'll be honest. I'd rather be working, just to be completely honest. But
oh, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Your third anagram is Walled Poop.
2 words.
1 word. The double P is very important. They released. They also released an Urca. What else can I give you? I believe it's South Australia. I have to double check that. I believe it's South Australia. Their first whiskey release was very, very, very young and wasn't a whiskey. It was a matured spirit. I think it was Muscat cask. It was only a few months old.
No,
say again?
Not Rochefort. No, that doesn't make sense.
No, I think earlier than Rochefort.
Yeah. Oh no, it's not iniquity. There's no need a Q. There's no tin shed. There's no
The
Southern
double
Coast.
P is important.
Yeah. I know. You said
The
that.
double P,
I haven't got it. I haven't got it.
Applewood.
Ah, of course it is. Shit. Yes. Very, very young spirit drink. I should have got that one. They're actually Apple. A big shout out to Applewood. They do produce some interesting spirit, not whiskey yet, but they do produce some interesting gins and okars and things like that. Yes.
I mean, like I'm so excited to head back to Australia to see my sister get married, but at the same time, I'm so excited to see so many distilleries.
Yeah.
It's like,
Interesting stuff again. Yeah, exactly.
well, I mean, my parents live on the Mornington Peninsula,
All
and
right.
a distillery opened on the Mornington Peninsula. I think there's about 3 or so within
Chief's Son.
about 20 minutes drive of the house. Say again?
Chief's Son Distillery.
I thought it was Jimmy Run.
Well, there's a distillery in Mornington Peninsula called Chief's Son, doing good whiskey.
I am definitely gonna see them.
Yeah, well worth it.
Now, you're gonna hate me for this.
It's another one I don't know, is it?
No, I assume you know all of these.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a big one though. I mean, come on, man.
I told you I'm not an anagram person.
All right.
I'll give it a go.
It is an obtainment I mourn. Now, this comes from the distillery is named after the place. There is a musical instrument which is played with the hands, and it's a very large rock formation.
Obtainment. Obtainment I mourn. Is that so? It's 4 words.
No. It's 2 words.
I can see the words abomination. No, that's an American distillery.
Queensland, they've done whiskey, they've done a lot of other spirits.
Queensland. No. There's no distilleries of note up there. Sorry. I'm gonna. Sorry, hold on. You're not talking about Big Black Cock Distillery, are we?
I am not on about Big Black Cock Distillery.
Because that's one of them.
Get your mind out of it.
That's the name of the distillery.
This is a serious show.
Sure. And then we've got Bundaberg, we've got Beanley, we've got.
Are there any distilleries around mountains?
The mountains.
Yeah, near a mountain of any kind. Maybe a mountain that's a percussion instrument.
Mount Tambourine Distillery.
Yeah, Tambourine Mountain. Yeah.
Tambourine Mountain. Sorry, yeah. Tambourine Mountain. Yes. Well, I got one. I got 2 out of 4 so far. Well, about 2.
No. You got that. You got Archie Rose.
I couldn't. And we've got one
I'd give you Hellier's Road as well.
Yeah, well, you gave me a big clue for that one. That's fine.
Yeah, as I tell everyone, I have not made a scoreboard for this. It's about having fun and watching you sweat under pressure.
Here we go.
Now, this last one is the longest anagram yet that I've done. This is not a distillery. I want to make that clear from the outset.
What is it?
It is a brand. That you should be familiar with. I'm going to It tells you how long it is by the fact that I'm taking time to write it. A cyclic swisheth took myth. 4 words.
Look, I'm going to go really obvious for a second. Scotch Malt Whiskey Society.
It is Scotch Malt Whiskey Society.
Straight away on that one. That's so good. Look, I think I'd have to hand my keys in if I got that one wrong. Let's be honest. That was a cyclic music. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's easy.
I had Andy Watts from Baines and James Sedgwick on 4 days ago.
Nice.
And I put Jack to me Swigs, which is an anagram of James Sedgwick, was the final anagram, and it took him about 5 minutes to get it. And I believe he got it because I gave him the clue, you live at this place. And he was like, what, James Sedgwick? And I was like, yes, James Sedgwick. I love Andy, by the way. If he watches this or is watching, Andy, you are fantastic, and I love you, mate.
That's awesome. No, that's always cool. Cool.
But, yeah, dude, that was everything. That is all of the questions, all of the quiz, all the anagrams, all the time we have.
I'm struggling a bit here because it's getting very late. But
Yes.
and I really appreciate you. Actually, I just want to say, like, seriously, thanks for having me on. This is great. I've watched a couple of your episodes before, and they've always been like lots of fun, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you keep these up. These are great. Like, just keep doing them. They're awesome.
I'm going to do this as long as people say yes to coming on. I'm going to be doing it. They may look out at odd times because I want to get people from all over the world, but
yeah,
I like what we do here, and I like to think maybe you can get a couple of new members.
Oh no, thanks, mate. You know what? And that's just the icing on the cake. Really, it's just the idea that you're able to have a dram with me at midday your time is always like lots of fun because the daytime drinking is always the best drinking.
I mean, I'm a little bit tipsy right now. I've had quite some hefty grams, and I'm up my 3rd or 4th. I can't remember.
Who's keeping
It's all
count?
good. No one.
Marcus,
I got nothing to do.
Thank you so much for having me on today. Really appreciate it.
No worries. To everyone who is watching right now, to everyone who is watching in the future, thanks so much for coming on to this episode of Malts with Mates. My name is Some Whiskey Bloke, and I've been joined by Matt Bailey, the amazing Matt Bailey of SMWS Australia. He said thank you to me, and I just want to say thanks so much for coming on, dude. It was fantastic to have you on, and I hope maybe if this turns to a new format, I'm going to bring you back for more laughs and more conversation.
And you know what? Let's even do one live. In person.
Oh yes, I see what you mean. I'll tell you what.
Isn't it like I get Wellington and talk whiskey and broadcast it? Why not?
When I get back to Australia, depending on how restrictions are going, if I could go up to Sydney, I'll meet you and we'll do one in a bar. You'd have to say the bar. I don't know the bars in Sydney that well.
I'll pick one out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. We'll do one live, dude.
Absolutely.
Anyway,
thanks, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks so much for coming on. It was absolutely fantastic.
Cheers.
And cheers to everyone at home. Cheers.
Slanjava.
Slanjava in